Welcome, everybody, to the 9/11 Tribute Museum's virtual My 9/11 story. Today, you'll be hearing a personal 9/11 story from Bob Porch, who is a 9/11 recovery worker. If you have any questions for Bob, please feel free to add them to the comment section, and I'll be happy to get those questions over to Bob for you to get answered. So, without any further ado, I'll give the floor up to Bob to share his personal story. Bob?
Thank you, Gregor. Hello, my name is Bob Porch, and I was a volunteer on what we call 9/11. Uh, it seems incredible to me that September 11th, 2001 is is more than 19 years ago. Uh, the events that happened while I was there are as clear in my mind as though it happened last month. Uh, At the time, I should say that I've had a number of careers in my lifetime. Yesterday was the 42nd anniversary of my 29th birthday. So I'm 71 and 1 day old now, and I've done a number of different things. When I was a young man, I learned how to build electric signs. I got a job in a sign factory, a national manufacturer. Started out mostly as a plastic man and moved. I went to night school to become a welder. And I figured that the more I knew about building electric signs, the more I'd be worth to the company. So I learned how to weld, and I learned how to take a oxyacetylene torch and cut steel beams and other pieces of steel to precise lengths to build the signs. So that's the primary skill that motivated me to going to ground zero. I spent about 25 years in the construction trades, and in the 90s, I got injured several times. Once was a head-on collision, and I decided that my construction days were over. And I went back as a non-traditional student to college, and I just kept taking classes. And one day, the dean called me to her office and said, "Bob, it's time for you to stop taking classes and go to work." And I said, "What do you mean?" She said, "I have got a job on here at the university. We're going to have you do some teaching." So I said, "Yeah, I could do that." So I became a member of staff on the university. And on 9/11, I was walking into my office, and somebody said to me, "Bob, did you hear a plane hit the World Trade Center?" And like many people, I assumed that it had to be a small plane, uh, single occupant, the pilot, and he probably became incapacitated, and the plane just, with nobody at the controls, crashed into the tower. So I went over to the student center where they had a large TV, and I saw my boss sitting there, and I sat down next to her, and I could see the smoke just billowing out of the North Tower. Um, I probably should have mentioned at the beginning that there's a number of people probably watching that either were too young to remember 9/11 or maybe even weren't born yet. Well, what happened on that day is Islamic terrorists hijacked four very large jetliners and used them as missiles. Two of them they used to attack New York, the World Trade Center. One of them they used to attack the Pentagon in Washington. And the third one was on the way to U.S. Capitol when heroic passengers and crew members stormed the cockpit after the hijackers took over and tried to recapture the plane, and the terrorists put it into the ground. So uh, in New York, uh, both the World Trade Center towers, which were 110 feet or 110 stories tall, uh, both of those were hit by wide body jetliners carrying about 10,000 gallons of fuel. They were on their way to the West Coast. And within a couple of hours, both of the buildings had collapsed. And you can imagine a building 110 stories tall, how much steel was needed to erect buildings like that. Each floor was a full acre. And there was another building behind the North Tower. It was building number 7. And it collapsed as a result of fires caused by the uh, jet fuel coming down, setting that building on fire. It collapsed the same day, and it was, a third building. So there was all this steel scattered around. It looked like a big pile of pickup sticks. When I was a kid, we used to take a box of spaghetti and open the end of it and turn and just dump it upside down, and it would just be, all different crazy directions in a pile. And the game was is you tried to pick up one piece without moving any of the others, and whoever got the most pieces of spaghetti won. And if you happened to move another piece while you were trying to extract one, you lost your turn. Well, that's what Ground Zero reminded me, except you're talking 20, 30, 40-ton girders. So I knew that the one critical skill that would be necessary would be burners, people that could cut the steel into pieces that the cranes could lift up. So uh, the attack occurred on a Tuesday. The city pulled up all of its drawbridges, literally. There was no way to get into New York City, into Manhattan, except on an official vehicle, police cars, fire engines, military vehicles, but a civilian vehicle could not enter the city. And I was set to go. I hadn't uh, I hadn't worked construction in about a decade. I got my old boots from downstairs and basement hanging on a nail. Pair of blue jeans. The weather was nice. It was warm. Uh, and were, uh, they finally announced on the TV that Thursday night they were going to restart train service into the city. So that's how I got into the city. I live in southern New Jersey, about 90 miles south of Manhattan. And I had to go from South Jersey to Philadelphia to Trenton to get into New York City. It took me 4 trains. And I left Thursday evening and got to New York City. It was after dark. And they had called for light showers. So I got a clear 99-cent poncho just to try and keep some of the light rain off of me. And the funny thing was, instead of light rain, it was almost monsoon-like, and there was a lot of electricity, a lot of lightning. So they had to pull back off of the site because if lightning had struck the steel and anybody was standing on it or close to it, they could get electrocuted. So there was no work going on at the site when I arrived. Uh, I came into Penn Station. It was about a 2-mile walk. The sky was as black as could be. And I went out in the middle of an intersection and I just did a slow 360 until I saw this smoke rising. And I knew that was the Trade Center. And I just started walking toward the smoke. It was late in the evening, and it was the most eerie experience I can recall, that I was in the middle of Manhattan, and the only sound that I could hear was the rain hitting my hard hat. There wasn't a soul moving, there wasn't a car moving. I never saw a vehicle move for a 2-mile walk in Manhattan. The city was just basically abandoned except for the rescue workers down at Ground Zero. The Every few blocks, I would encounter a barricade with a police officer standing there, and I would show him my ID. It said, "That's my ID, Local 27" on a T-shirt, and all I said was, "I burn iron," and he said, "You can pass." So uh, I did this repeatedly. And finally, I got to the last barricade before uh, the actual collapse site. And there was a young officer there, and he said to me, "You can pass if you want, but did you see that door up there to your left that's open?" And I said, "Yeah." He said, "Why don't you go up inside there, get yourself some decent rain gear, and they've got coffee." Well, I really like coffee, so it sounded good to me. And I got up to the door, and there was a policewoman standing there. And she didn't have a very friendly look. And I knew I was going to have to give a right answer to get past her. And said, "Can I help you?" And kind of like, "What do you want?" And I said, "Well, look, I burn iron. If you don't have a torch, I operate a shovel. And if you don't have a shovel, I brought gloves." With that, she cracked a smile and said, "Okay, you can go inside." I won't mention the building that I entered because I don't want to give terrorists an idea of where uh, the people that I joined, what kind of buildings they select. Uh, but when I walked inside, the elite teams of the New York, New York City Police Department, called the emergency service units, were all in there. They had lost 14 members, but except for those 14, the rest of them were in this building. And they were joined by teams from Indianapolis, Philadelphia, and Baltimore. And they also had 3 teams of construction workers that were supporting what they were going to be doing. And I ended up joining one of those teams, not knowing what I was volunteering for. So, uh, like I said, I don't want to give the terrorists any ideas, but they had commandeered this building. It did have showers and it did have uh, emergency generators, and that's why they picked it. But uh, I know a lot more about that day now than I did on that particular day. Most people watching televisions knew more about what was happening down there than we did. Uh, One of the construction workers came over to me and said, "Do you have a Sharpie?" And I didn't, but I told him I did. And He says, well, just a suggestion. You might want to write your social security number somewhere on your body, maybe your chest or something. He says, it's just a suggestion. And I said, oh, okay. He says, just in case something bad happens. And I'm like, I didn't like the sound of that. He said, you might want to write it on your arms and your legs too. And I really didn't like the sound of that either. So a little while later, I happened to overhear one of the commanders talking to the fellow that turned out to be my team leader of the team that I was on, asking if he knew any engineers. And this guy said, well, I know some, but I'm not good friends with any. Why do we need engineers? And the police commander says, well, we believe that there's at least two more 50-story buildings that are in imminent danger of collapse. And the assignment that the emergency service police drew was to go into the uncollapsed portions of the underground and search for survivors. Being from South Jersey, I really didn't know anything about the World Trade Center other than I had been there once, gone up to the windows of the world, and got an appreciation for how big those buildings were looking down from the 107th floor. But there was a massive underground, 16 acres worth that went down 70 feet, 6 stories, whatever. There was a 5-car or 5-level parking garage, all kinds of mechanical areas, elevators that went to the bottom. Just, at one time, the largest shopping mall in America was located underneath the trade towers. So, I mean, it was just this vast underground, and it was only directly below the Twin Towers that it was totally compressed. And the perimeter areas, there were still a lot of parts that were either partially collapsed or fully intact. And that's the areas they were going to search. And in some of the more dangerous areas where there was partial collapse, they wanted construction workers that knew, hey, if we move this, is something else going to move? Are we going to cause an avalanche of debris? Things like that. And, they also needed different skills like burners. I didn't know it, but the day before the last rescue took place on the very top of the pile, a young woman was trapped uh, 70 feet in the air in a couple of feet of pulverized concrete. And there was a large steel girder laying on top of her that had her pinned. And there was mounds of debris on both ends, so it couldn't be lifted. And they had to call for a welder to come and use a cutting torch to cut each end of this girder so that about 10 or 12 guys could lift the girder off of her and free her so she could be taken to the hospital. So when I had first walked in, they asked me, what do you do? And I said, I'm a burner. And they said, all right, you're with us. Because they figured they might need somebody down there to cut some beams or something. Anyhow, like I said, 9/11, well, 2000, uh, September 11th, 2001 is over 19 years ago. But for us, 9/11 is still continuing. The World Trade Center site was the worst toxic waste site in the history of New York. If you can imagine all of the electronics, uh, the computers, the monitors, the telephones, fax machines, copy machines. There was just so much electronics in those buildings. Now pour 20,000 gallons of diesel fuel on it and set it on fire and see what kind of toxins you get in the smoke. In addition, there was 2 buildings worth of pulverized concrete, 44,000 windows that just vaporized into powdered silicone, 5,000 tons of asbestos insulation that was microscopically small. And that's what was in the air while we were down there. And a paper mask in the rain doesn't help. And they had no respirators for us at that point. They got them later on, but not in the first few days. Uh, so at one point, I got separated from my team and I got caught in this cloud of green smoke. One building, the Marriott Hotel, had a huge swimming pool on the roof. And I know they had a stockpile of chlorine for it. And the DEA had a munitions bunker in Building 6. And the Customs Department had a munitions bunker in Building 7. And they included a lot of different types of gas for riot control, riot dispersal. And this stuff was all burning. Initially, police officers thought there was a ground attack following the planes because there was a lot of munitions going off. And they heard the sound of gunfire but didn't know where it was coming from and thought it was people on the ground attacking the rescue workers. And it turned out just to be munitions going off underground. They also thought that maybe police officers that were trapped were shooting their guns to let people know that they were alive and underground there. But that wasn't the case. It was just these munitions going off. As you can see, I'm on oxygen. Uh, that's new this year. My lungs are basically shot. The the World Trade Center program has been taking good care of me since 2007, and I'm on over 30 prescriptions now. I don't take them all at once or all of them every day, but during the course of the year, this last year, I've had 36 different prescriptions, and I average using probably about 20 of them a day. Sometimes I'll get a respiratory infection. It'll take 3 different antibiotics to knock it out. But, you know, it was an experience I'll never forget. I met some incredible people. Um, some of the people that I met just so impressed me with their selflessness. It was like there was a perimeter established around the site, and even people couldn't that lived inside the perimeter had stores in the perimeter. They weren't allowed through. They weren't allowed to go back initially. Later on, they were escorted to their apartments or businesses and allowed to take things out. But the site was locked down, and only people that had something to do with the rescue and recovery operation were allowed in. And it was like everybody just checked their egos at the barricade. If a job needed to be done, somebody just volunteered or just started doing it. People came from all over. While I was walking down to the site from Penn Station, I knew that the West Side Highway passed by the trade centers. So I made my way over toward the river, the highway runs, and started walking down. And at one point, I came upon 2 rows of vehicles. And this is in the pouring rain. One side, against the curb, was a line of TV trucks from all over the world. And it didn't occur to me that, just about every major city on the planet would have a TV truck in New York because it was a financial capital of the world. And in the center was a second row of vehicles, and it was fire trucks, rescue trucks, basically from anywhere in the country that they could have been driven within 48 hours. I saw them from Missouri, from Kentucky, from Ohio, from Pennsylvania, from West Virginia. I can't remember all the places that I saw these vehicles from. And of course, everybody was just hunkered down, waiting for this storm to lift. Nobody was moving. I was probably the only person on the street, other than those police officers that are manning the barricades. Unfortunately, we never found anyone alive from the time I got there. The last rescue had been the day before, and you know, it's one of those kind of things that I left there because I had a contract with the university. I had to go back to work. My dean said as long as it was a rescue operation, she'd, cover, take care of, get somebody to do what I did until I got back. But, I did have to return. I couldn't stay for a recovery operation. Had I not been under contract, not been working at the university, I likely would have stayed there for the duration if I could have. Although Monday following 9/11, they did divide the site into 4 quadrants and put a major construction company in charge of each one. And I don't know if they'd have let me stay or not. I didn't have a current union card, and they were using, you know, all union construction workers, the operating engineers, the iron workers. But I just, the only other thing I guess I could add to my story is that I was scared to death. The idea of being underground with 250-story towers, it could collapse on us anytime. I asked one of the construction workers, I said, just what's the plan? And he said, well, we're to follow the police, keep them in sight, and not get too close to them. Uh, and that way, if something bad happens, building collapsing, we're supposed to come quick and start digging. And the thought occurred to me is, well, if the police pass under one of these 50-story towers and they get through okay, and it collapses on us, who's supposed to come dig us out? So, yeah, I was scared lots. That's the truth. The only other thing I can add to it is simply this. When we were down there looking for survivors, there were no Democrats, there were no Republicans, there were no Protestants, there were no Catholics, no Jews, no Muslims. Oh, didn't matter what our backgrounds were. University, university guy, iron worker, didn't matter. We were just human beings trying to help somebody, anybody. who might be in need of our help. And the unity that we had as a nation, I wish we could return to. We're so divided now. Breaks my heart. I love the city of New York and the people there, and to see what's happened to it, I say it breaks my heart. But I still love the city. I haven't been able to I volunteered with the museum uh, for several years doing tours and being a guide in the museum. And I haven't been able to get up there because of my lungs. And I'm hoping that they'll be able to find some kind of new treatment that'll allow me to go back. But that's my story. I'm sticking to it. Thank you for watching.
And thank you, Bob, for sharing your story and also for the message at the end. It is really important, for people to understand how people really did come together after 9/11, and, you know, where you came from didn't matter, what you believed in didn't matter. People were just down there to help one another and just help the city. So, hopefully people can really take something from that message and realize that, at the end of the day, we're all just human beings just trying to get through life. And, you know, we shouldn't make it any more difficult on each other. We should just come together, understand we may have differences, but we're all still human. And, that's just something really important that we remember. That is going to wrap up our program today. As noted at the beginning, if you have any questions for Rob, please feel free to add them to the comment section and we'll get those answered for you. Again, Bob, it's always an honor to hear your story. It's been a pleasure to be with you here today. And we thank you all for watching this program. We'll see you next time.
Thanks, Gregor.